Yeah, UV unwrapping. Yeah. What is UV unwrapping? UV unwrapping is the process of taking your 3D model and flattening it into 2D. So that way you can texture it later on. So the workflow. It can basically be understood as this flow chart here. Can you guys see that over here? So you start by optimizing your model for unwrapping. Then you make seams, you physically unwrap it, you orient that on a basically like a piece of paper, you could think about it, and then you optimize, which basically is shorthand for do it all again till it works right. Because odds are you probably won't get it right on the first try. Nobody does. This is important because this step, like I said previously, is the one that happens in between modeling and texturing. And so if you take shortcuts here, when you go to texture, there's going to be a lot of wonky stuff. And obviously, you guys are probably aiming for like a high quality because, you know, you want to make portfolio pieces, you want to do good, you want to get good grades, you want to say, you know, you're good at what you do. So if you get to texturing and you're like, oh man, I got all these problems and I don't know why, odds are you took a shortcut here and you're paying for it later on. And you're either going to have to go back and redo all of it again, or you're going to deal with the mistakes you made, which, you know, nobody wants to do. So start with optimizing for unwrapping and other things to consider before starting. First, what is your model's purpose? Are you putting in a game engine? You taking renders, is it animation, stills? What kind of materials will this be receiving? Is it like going to be something super glossy and shiny? Is it like the biggest piece in the whole scene? Or is it like, you know, something you don't really see that much, a mouse on a desk? Can you get rid of faces? So with what was previous said, will the model be seen from every angle or just one? Because if you're just seeing it from one angle, there's, you know, odds are you don't need, doesn't need to have a backside. Are there intersecting faces? So did you, you know, put a cube on top of a cylinder? You don't need the faces that intersect. You can get rid of those. Because everything that you have, like every single polygon, every single like vertice, has to be flattened into 2D. You can't be like, oh, well, I don't want to, you know, I'm not going to texture this face, so I don't need it. It has to go. You can imagine it pretty much like a paper model. Do you have more vertices than you need? And then, are the faces manifold? Manifold will be addressed in, I think, 2 slides from now, but that's a very important thing to consider. A couple other things. Do your faces need more texture density? So are there certain areas that need, you know, a higher definition? Is it like a TV screen? The border of the TV doesn't really need that much space, but the screen does, because you want it to look like it's an actual screen, not like, you know, super pixelated. Are your normals facing the correct direction? If you don't know what normals are, we're going to cover that in, I think, 3 slides. And yeah, like I said before, every polygon has to be flattened, so just beware of that. So here are a couple of videos of your polygon consideration. Like I said, every face has to be flattened. So you can see in the good area, it's the same shape, except in good, all the faces are connected. There's no intermittent face between the 2 stairs, I'll call them. On the right, you can see that when I pull it, there's that whole long face that goes the entire way. Both of those have to get taken, flattened completely. And so you're going to put textures, eventually, in those areas that nobody will see ever. So, there's that. Again, more polygon consideration. Be sure to remove things like 2 vertices in the same exact space. Super close vertices that are like literally like this close. There's no reason to have those. Make those 1. As you can see, the model on the left is all quads, 4 sides. It's going to be super easy to pick where you want, which edges you want to be cut, to be flattened. Well, on the right, it's kind of a freaking mess, and that's going to be very hard to sort through, especially later on when you're trying to be like, which part of this is what part in the 2D view as opposed to the 3D view, because you're going to have all these little bits and pieces. So manifold. This is super important. If you don't take anything away from this, I hope you just take away this. Your model will not unwrap right if things are not manifold. And basically all manifold means is that it's a solid surface. So as you can see in the non-manifold part, there's a single edge was extended as like a plane off of that cube. That's super freaking bad. Like never do that. The manifold is that same idea, just you can see I put an edge loop and then I extruded it. It's just got a little bit of thickness to it. You don't want anything to meet at just one plane because that will ruin everything. Normal orientation. So normals are the direction that the plane of a polygon is facing. If you guys have ever been like, you know, in an editor, they'll show faces as double-sided. They're not see-through from one end. But when you one day take that, because you're going to have to, because you're going to have a class that makes you do it, you're going to have multiple, take that and move that into a game engine. They won't do that. So then you'll be like, why do I have faces that are all of a sudden invisible? This shouldn't be see-through. This is a solid box. And that's because your planes have a right side, like a top side and a bottom side. And what you've done is you flip them. And so there are a couple different ways to do this in different editors. They'll show you, like, this is Blender I have here, the blue, which is oriented out. You want it to be oriented in the correct direction out from wherever it's supposed to be facing. So, you know, in this case, it's a donut, so it would be around the donut. As you can see in the bottom with incorrectly, we got a couple blue arrows facing in, we got a couple blue arrows facing out. When I ever tried to texture that or bring it into a game engine, it would look like garbage. So, actual unwrapping. Creating seams is the process of cutting where you're going to smush your 3D model. So if you imagine it like paper, you have physical paper like cube, where are you going to cut to flatten this into 2D? If you don't cut in the right areas, when you flatten it, they're going to overlap. You understand what I mean? So where you want to add seams is usually not always obvious, but the most obvious areas are probably where you want to add one. So follow where large bodies meet, where textures will naturally change. So if you have an area where it's going from wood to metal, if it's got like a hard edge on it, a big indent, that might be a place to consider putting a seam. And basically, when you have a round surface, whenever you flatten it, there's going to be stretching. Where can you cut it to reduce that stretching? So do you guys want to do one like together? Like to actually see? Yes? Okay. I'm taking you. You're all I need. So this is my little mushroom man I stole from the internet. He's not unwrapped at all. So can anybody give me some areas where they think we should put seams? Where do you think we should cut this flat to get it to look good? The head. Where the head? So like, what are you talking about? Like here? This area? So separate this into two. Sidewise or like this? Sidewise. Where are you thinking? You thinking like here, down here? Both places. All right, we'll do that. I'll turn to edge select. We'll mark a seam here. We'll mark a seam here. All right, where else? Anywhere else? Actually, you know what? We'll get rid of this base pad because that doesn't matter. Where else? Anybody? Like literally anybody. It's totally cool. Take a guess. We're all gonna get it wrong. Down the side. Which side? Straight down the middle. In the back. in the back. We're going to do one down the back, just like this. Boom. Anywhere else, anybody? Or we think this will successfully make this little guy get ready for texturing. No, you don't get to participate. What major are you? Okay. I don't know. I don't want anybody cheating. This is for them as opposed for you guys. What's the general question? The legs are not part of the same geometry. These are, so if I come here and I select these faces, the legs are inside the body. So as you can see, they didn't quite listen to what I said about intersecting geometry. They have all this space right here. That's going to be overlapping. So is this what we're good with for right now? We'll come back to it? Okay. Cool beans. So, a couple how-to gifts. First one is to show you how to do that in Blender, which I just did. The second one is in Maya. You have to open a separate window, select your edges, and then go back to that window and press Cut to set a seam. That is the most laborious way of doing it, and so that's the one I showed. So, step 3. Unwrap. This is where your computer takes the model, cuts on those seams, stretches it flat. This is where it's doing all the heavy lifting for you, right? So things to consider when you're looking at this, because all this is really doing is pressing one button, it's squishing it flat, and then you're looking at it. You need to look at, are the polygons represented in a way that makes sense? If you have a face and you cut around the face, does it look screwed up as all? Like, you know what I mean? Like, does it not look like a face? Are there overlapping polygons? Does it look like, you know, you got a million lines in one area? Are the polygons super stretched in certain areas? You got a really tiny space, and all of a sudden, when you're looking at the UV unwrap, it's huge. You tried to do like a bolt, and the bottom face is the entire width of your space. If these are all problems, you need to go look back at step 2, because what that means is your seams were not properly cut. So we're going to do that now to our beautiful little mushroom man. And this is what we get. So we're looking at this. We see anything overlapping? No? We see anything that looks, you know, like it probably shouldn't? See a couple flinches. Max, you don't get to participate. I'm sorry. Any of you guys? Anything that look a little wonky here? Does this look like this guy represented well?
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of no. Okay. So now where it really comes in is, first off, we're going to show you these cool little how-tos in both, where I show you the ways to do it. In Blender, you select every face, then you go to UV tab, and you press Unwrap. In Maya, it's a similar process. You select every face, you go back to that little window you popped up, and you find Unfold. And now you can see both of the similarly shaped UV islands. You can even see that little seam on the second one, on the Maya one, if we watch that again. That seam we made earlier, right here in the middle, you'll actually see how that has an effect when I unwrap it, because this little area right here is that cut. That's stretching it flat, and the computer being like, I have no idea why you did this. So it just puts a hole there. And then you get all this warping. Because it's a cylinder, you want your squares to be straight. So this, like curvature, no bueno. When you go to make a texture, and since textures are square, it's going to look all messed up. So Hello? There we go. UV islands, this is another little vocab word. UV islands are just, when you look at it in the 2V view, they are the groups. So an entire set where you made cuts. They're a good way of looking at the space as a whole. It simplifies it because going through this polygon by polygon, especially in a higher polygon model, would be an absolute hell. So this is a good way of looking at this, and it's also a term that's used quite frequently. So it's a good one to know. Part 4, orient. So this is where you scale your UV islands according to how much texture density they need, or scale. Well, if you're going for, like, if you're making a person, you want them to have the same density of texture throughout their whole body. They'll all be the same size. But the bigger you make something, the more textures you can put on it, pretty much. You're limited. So as you can see in this little GIF, everything kind of stays within that square. So when you make a texture, I don't know if you guys will learn this eventually. Textures are square. They're a standard set size based upon the power of 2. So you'll get 1048 by 1048, or 1024 by 1024, 248 by 248, 4096 by 4096. And you're confined to that space. If you put anything outside of that space, the computer freaks out. So you have to learn, this is the management of cramming as much crap as you can into a little square. And so you'll see in the next slide, a good orientation versus a bad orientation. When you're orienting, excluding scale and all that, what you're really looking for is the best use of your space possible. So on the left, you see how nicely packed this is. Everything, all the UVs fit in nicely in this square, and there's not a lot of leftover space. But if you look on the right, there is a way that whoever made this, gentleman or lady, could have really reoriented those to make the best use of their space. Because there's a lot of empty space in there that's literally, like, all that is just wasted texture. It's wasted data, it's wasted space, and you're trying to avoid that because they look at stuff like that when you get a job. So, stretching and warping, little trick, by adding a texture of a grid to your newly unwrapped model, you can see how distorted the textures will be. So this is kind of like the practical application of what I'm talking about with textures. You can see in the front, along that red line, it's real nice and tiny. Those squares are about the size they're supposed to be. And all these squares should be the same size. But if you look in the back at the blue, somebody screwed something up because that's gigantic. And so when you have a texture, say it's, I don't know, wood, all of a sudden in the front, all the wood grains will be real tight and it'll look real good. And then you'll look around in the back and it'll look like somebody stretched gum. So you want to be aware of that. And so we're going to do something similar to our little mushroom man. You can see I have the grid set up already because I cheat. And we're going to throw this up. So, as we can see, obviously, this is not what we're going for, is it? So, we're going to go back to the presentation and step 5, optimize. So, the way we went through it together with setting seams, unwrapping, noticing that we did a really terrible job is pretty much par for the course most of the time. Every model you'll do will be different. They'll look different. They'll have different shapes. And that's really the challenge of this stage. So if you are doing this and you do it, a couple times and you're like, damn, this really just doesn't look good, keep going because that's where most of us do anyway. And it's totally normal. Don't get discouraged. So we're going to go back to this bad boy. And where do you think we could add some more seams? Change some stuff around. Any areas? Do I need to start leading a little bit? All right, I'm gonna. So first off, we don't have anything on the legs, like at all. These are pretty much just getting, when the computer looks at them from a top-down view, smushed flat. You can see how they look here, like a circle. Not what we're going for. So where do you think we could add some seams on this little leg here to make it unwrap right? On the side? Which side? The back. It's always good to put stuff in the back because nobody looks at the back. Where else? On the foot. Where on the foot? This blue line? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm gonna lead you. Yeah. So anywhere there's like an open face like that, you're gonna want to put like see how there's like a clear see-through hole? You're gonna want to put a seam there, just for like good, like it'll unwrap it like that naturally, but it's good practice. Anywhere else? Based off literally what I just said? Jay, you can't go. I'm sorry. The top. Yes, absolutely. So now, when we take this bad boy and we unwrap him, we're just going to do the leg right now. Look at that. That's a lot better. We can do a little bit extra here, and I'll orient it with grid. And you can see that these squares are a lot better of a size. There is still some warping. If I make this even larger, ignore the left side of the screen, this is for demonstration purposes. You can see there still is some warping, especially down here on this foot. But since this is such like a low poly like model, there's no real reason to go there and do that. You're not going to notice that little bit of warping. The warping we're looking for is more something along the lines of this. So, yeah, that's this, like this, anything that looks like this, bad. Go back. You have made a wrong turn somewhere, and you need to go recalculate on your little GPS. So, given that, fix that. We're going to do the same thing to this leg because I care about how things look. What's up? Because it's basically the same thing, also just copy over the Unwrap. They're not separate objects. So this is one mesh, so you have to do it by hand. If these were two completely separate objects, you could copy over. I don't know. That's the honest answer. I don't know. It might be some parameter copying of some sort, like because you have like the stack. So it might be one of those. I know in Blender you can absolutely do it. So, but all right. Now let's take on this bigger shape. Where else? Because he's looking not good right here. All of them. Base layer. So where? Which one? Give me an edge loop. Thinking this one, thinking this one, thinking this one. First, second, third. This one or this one? This one? All right. So I would recommend going where the crease is. Oh God. I'd recommend going where the crease is. So yeah, you could really, because they have like a nice soft edge there, you could really go with either or. It's not going to make a gigantic difference. So we'll throw this here. You'll get a little warping on this edge. If you did this, the see up here, the seam might be a little visible when you do the actual texturing, but you can mitigate that while texturing. So where else? We're doing good, pretty solid, but we're missing a couple pieces. Can anybody tell us what else we're missing? Like how we did for the bait, we got one right here. I don't know if that's hard to see, but yeah, we got one right here. So covered that, but great idea, great suggestion. We're missing physical, actual pieces we haven't touched at all. And I'm calling on you. We don't have eyes, but if that's what these are, what you're calling eyes, then yes. These got to get touched a little bit because I don't know if they have a back face. Let me check because they don't have a back face. So theoretically, these are going to get smushed flat. You can see right here, they're pretty much the same thing. But because I'm teaching you the pedantic way of doing this, very slow and methodical, we're going to put a seam on the back where they don't have a face. If they did have a face, you would absolutely need it because then you would be overlapping. But since they don't have a face, you're not going to get any overlapping. We're going to put one there just for safety. So now we're going to unwrap this bad boy again. And he's not looking terrible. Give me 2 seconds. Ignore all this. This is extra stuff for me. I'm just going to increase the resolution of that grid. Maybe 2. There we go. That's better. I like that better. So now I can see this grid a little better. What do we notice about it? What might be some problems you could see here? Just off the bat, really quickly. I'm going to start letting the upperclassmen make comments. So you're free if you want to say something on it. Going back to the left side, you see how on the top left, the little squish, I guess this one? Right there. Mm-hmm. Yes, you can, and I forget where that is. Do you know where that button is? Because I don't know how to do it in this version. Yeah, you can, but it won't select it over here. Yeah. So there is a way to do that. I don't remember what the link is. No, I lied. Okay, so we will figure that out in a little while because I don't actually. It's this. Okay, here we go. This little button right here allows you to select which one's what. So obviously there's a problem here because this theoretically should be unwrapping like a cylinder, right? You got to cut at the top, cut at the bottom, cut down the back. That should be a rectangle. Can anybody kind of see what the problem is? Exactly. So I made an error while I was up here, and I screwed up, and I didn't put a seam. But it's very likely you'll probably do something like that too. So yeah, absolutely. And now you can see all this warping that's going on over here. See how stretched it is up here and how fine it is back here? All that warping is going to go away now because now it should just unwrap like a regular rectangle. And you can see there's a little bit of warping here, and you can take some efforts to straighten those. That's a little more tedious of a process. But for right now, look at that. That's aside from the mouse spinning, that's a pretty good looking grid. So we're going to tackle that on the top, and then we'll finish the presentation. So based on what I just said, now you see how it should look on this model specifically. What's got to get fixed up here on his mushroom hat top thing? Do we see what the problem is? Like just in general terms. Yes, the warping. So as you can see up here, super stretched out over here. It looks like a nice grid over here, but now it's curving this way, curving that way. No bueno. Down here isn't the worst. I believe this is cut all the way. It is, but it's making a curve because the top isn't done right. So what do you think we could do? There's a couple options. So I'll give you one. One is to be completely insane and make extra work when you do texturing. You can give one right down up the middle. Now this works for other stuff, not so much. This isn't the greatest, practice, because eventually you will have to, when you texture it, you'll have to go back and make sure that seam gets covered up. But now you have two pretty much bulbous hemispheres that there's no real way to stop completely warping on this because it's a literal like hemisphere. So you guys know what a globe is, right? You guys ever looked at a map of a globe, like a map and then a globe? And you ever realize, like, play with one of those websites where it like lets you move the country around and then it shrinks size and it's like, oh, Alaska is actually way bigger than I thought it was. That kind of deal. That's because of this very property right here, is things get more dense at the top and less dense towards the middle. So that's why it'll be small up here and big down here. So there's no real way to get completely rid of that. But, you know, and actually, to be honest, I would go through the rest of this and just take my time straightening this manually if I were doing this. But I'm not going to cover that because that takes forever. There are easier ways to do it, but I didn't prepare for those. So we're going to call this guy finished right this second. Also because I don't want to spend all day here. So you finished it. It's got a good density to it. The grid's looking good. It's time to get them out of there. You could call it finished. So, hooray. If you're happy with it, you can export it. You can just apply the textures in your editor when you do that eventually. But most of you will probably end up using a third-party texturing software like Substance Painter or Photoshop. And so you'll want to export those here now. So you can export it in almost every file type supports UVs. There's a couple that don't, and those are really targeted towards like 3D printing. And so odds are you'll never really encounter those unless you guys are trying to 3D print, in which case none of this matters anyway because you can't do textures on a 3D print. But FBXs, OBJs, ABCs, which are called alembics, I always pronounce it wrong, those all support UVs, and they're all they're great file types. Fantastic, love them all. And so yeah, questions? Any? You all understand this perfectly. I'm not going to come to any of the studios, and none of you are going to be like, man, I'm kind of stuck. All right. If that's it, then that's it. You got any questions, Max? You need a refresher on how to do this? Take a grid of UVs and you just instantly square them. And like, is there like a button to square them? Is there a button to square them? In Maya, don't know. Is there? In what? In Maya? What's the button? Tell him. Answer the question. I don't know Maya as extensively. Probably like we'll go with optimize. In Blender, they have different unwrapping methods. So you have the stock unwrap. You have follow active quads, which is basically you set a preset square and say, all right, this is the cube I want, and then the computer will do all the math to automatically straighten it. It also has like smart unwrapping, which usually looks like garbage. Also, yeah, I'm going to show you guys that right now, just to show you it probably will look like shit. Shouldn't say that, but in Blender, if you use Blender, because I know that's popular, they have smart unwrapping. Smart UV project is called. This is not the best choice all the time. If you're doing something quickly, roughly, like it's a mouse on a desk, you're never going to see it aside from passing glance. This will save you time. But if this is like your big character for the end of the semester, don't do this. For the love of all that is holy, do not do this. Because it gives you stuff like this. Well, this isn't necessarily a bad UV unwrap, but there are qualms to it, and you should never just take it the way it is. For example, It does a lot of the straightening for you, but it also does crap like this, where you have a giant circle in the middle. And so that's just wasted space. This whole thing down here, wasted space. So it'll make good UV unwraps, but also make a shit ton of seams too. So that means when you're going back and you're like, oh, I gotta paint all this stuff later on, bring it into Photoshop or bring it into Substance Painter, and I gotta make it look nice. You're gonna have to do more extensive work to cover up those seams because they don't always show. But if you're doing something like you're hand painting something or there's some kind of error, nothing likes to work the way it's supposed to ever. So, you know, you bring it in Substance Painter, do all the steps you're supposed to, and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, you're drawing over this, and it just doesn't, it's just, all of a sudden it's turning white instead of red, and you're like, I don't understand this. Or you have a single gray square somewhere in there. It's probably this. It's also hard to sort through. It's a bit of a mess. And so you can see they do stuff like this, like just this area. Which, again, not necessarily the worst, not necessarily the best. A lot of wasted space. They also tend to do stuff like this. You want to avoid stuff like this, specifically things directly next to each other, because depending on your texture density, like, so say you're doing something that you want to look like, what's a low-res game? Like a low-res 3D game. And you guys play League of Legends? You do? And you guys have seen League of Legends though, right? Like you've seen like models of it. I'll go back to the literal first, because I have one up there. God. Here we go. This one, actually. I'll step out of here. I'll come up here, grab it, and I'll make it gigantic. This guy, super low poly. Not right now, but when he's in the game, pretty low poly. Like the dude is like literally like, he looks like a PS2 game, honestly. And PS2 games are a good reference for this here. And so, what was my thought? I forget what my thought was. Yeah. So what'll happen is you'll get a boss. He'll be like, we're making a game. And games, you know, we don't want them, or movies, we don't want it to be gigantic. We don't need this game that's, you know, a cookie clicker on your phone to be 2 terabytes. So not everything that you do can get 4K textures. So he'll tell you, all right, you get to this model, 256 by 256 pixels, everything. And so if you pack it super tight with literally no margins, and you do stuff like this, what'll happen at lower reses, is where you have to take this into account, is 1 pixel will overlap. And then you'll have, all of a sudden, that little gray thing will actually be, you'll have a zigzag line between two texture points on the side of your, so if you're mixing, like, you know, his hat texture and his body texture, right here, there'll be a literal, like, line like that on the textures. And that's not good at all. That will cause a lot of panic. So if you're working specifically with lower res stuff, that is something to take into account. If you're not, it's still better practice to give them just a little breathing room. That's it. That's everything. That's everything you ever need to know ever. You guys are set. You can line up at the door. I'll hand out the grease.